Hello, it's episode 5 of the Top 2 Inches Rugby podcast, sponsored by I Spy Surveys, the go-to specialist survey and inspection company based in Exeter, Devon. What's going to happen in episode 5? Well, it's the end of last season's Six Nations, so we will review all of the games and see who came out on top. England, Ireland and France were in the mix in that respect, and who ended up with the wooden spoon? More than likely it was Italy. We'll also look at the ladies game, who came out on top in the Six Nations. I think the English Red Roses are actually already champions after last week's game, but did they do the Grand Slam? That's the question. There is also a rearranged Allianz 15 game that I want to have a look at. The Bledisloe Cup between Australia and New Zealand took place this weekend, the start of the TriNations. So we'll have a little review of that. I want to touch on the fact that the Rugby Union has decided to suspend all adult games below level 3 and the impact that's going to have on grassroots rugby. We'll also have some questions. I made a post on Twitter asking for the fans to send in any questions that they might have, and I'm going to attempt to answer them. A few people did send some in, which is quite nice. And JJ Williams, the Welsh international and also British and Irish Lions player who recently passed away this week. I just want to touch on his career and chat about that. Don't forget, we'll also have our rugby fact of the week, and then I'll round up the show with what's happening next week. So it was announced this week by the RFU Council, advising it was a very difficult decision to make to cancel adult competitive leagues level 3 and below for men and level 2 and below for women for the 2020-21 season. In a statement, they said that they believe that even if a return to full contact rugby became possible, playing a meaningful competitive league season resulting in promotion and relegation is no longer feasible. Given the government's additional restrictions to curb the increase of COVID-19 cases in locations across the country, they had a growing concern around travelling significant distances outside immediate localities to fulfil fixtures, which is understandable, due to the increased risk of transmission. So the decision has been made so they can provide clubs with some certainty for the remainder of the season. So the championship remains on course to start in January 2020, with the league subject to the government's elite return to play protocols. So what does that kind of mean? So the RFU have been in daily contact with the government about moving towards some form of contact rugby that will enable as many matches to take place as possible. So Stephen Granger of the RFU Rugby Development Director said, "We're very keen to see competitive rugby being played again and have been pushing extremely hard to accelerate a return to contact rugby. However, we also have to be realistic about the prevalence of COVID-19 cases in society, and given the introduction of further regional restrictions, we are working with the government to create an alternative solution. But what will this mean for local rugby?" The honest answer is I'm not 100% sure. I'm hoping that in due course, although as this goes out now, we were made aware on Saturday that we are now going into a second lockdown until the 2nd of December. Boris was due on Saturday to do a press conference. Clearly this didn't happen until later on, around about 6:30, which interestingly, or a little bit later maybe, coincided with the end of the England game against Italy, which kind of suggests the cabinet were probably had made their decision and were just watching the game. I saw an interesting post from Torquay Rugby Club, like I said, my local rugby club, and a couple of episodes we had the director of rugby, Gav Webber, on the show to talk about the impact of COVID. And you know, he highlighted the difficulties that all local clubs in Torbay are currently having, and how they're all trying to work together to keep clubs afloat. And the statement from Torquay kind of said that they were going to try and do their best to get some more stuff kind of going on at the club, get people in, TV watching, putting on dues for the meals, big games like the Autumn 8 International Cup thing that's coming up soon, the Premiership obviously, so they're going to try and keep those things kind of going and keep money coming into the club. What I want to kind of move on to is the questions that I had received from my request on Twitter, which I think kind of the majority of them were linked around the decision by the government. Now, where did I put those questions? So, how are the Championship clubs going to fund a return to rugby? I think that's going to be really difficult because obviously there's no crowds, there's no income, and obviously they're expected to follow the elite return to play process. And then also coupled with the fact that less than 12 months ago the funding was cut, forcing quite a few of the clubs to return to semi-professional status. So, I'm not really sure how they're going to kind of fund the return to rugby, if I'm honest. I guess maybe it could be through sponsorship or advertising, maybe some kind of events that they can hold on at the club as well. And I guess also it kind of poses another question: what's going to happen to the youth rugby and the academies? I mean, I'm quite worried, if I'm honest, that we could lose a whole generation of quality players, which would be really bad for the sport. Another question that I had was, with Exeter winning the European double, do you think they can go on to win them both again next season, or win any at all? That is an interesting question. I think Exeter, I would hope that they would manage to retain at least one of them. It'll be interesting to see, what will happen. Exeter are obviously a strong team. They're developing. They haven't got many. I think what's quite interesting is they don't have that many players in the England team. They've got Johnny Hill, they've got Slady, and a couple of others, haven't they? I can't remember now. But interestingly, I think they're pretty much going to. The Premiership season starts again in a month or so's time. Pre-season starts. So I think it's going to be quite interesting that they pretty much will have a full strength squad, bar a few players. My understanding is, obviously, with international players, next season they'll only be allowed to play 12 games. But I think Exeter have probably got the depth to retain the Premiership and go quite far in the European game, but not potentially, do the double-double as Saracens had done historically. And the final question was, I've got it written down, 2 seconds, where's that gone? With the women's game lacking money and finances, how can this be sustained? I don't know. It's another situation that each individual club's going to have to look at, and they're going to have to come up with ways to make money and keep themselves afloat. Like any kind of, I think there's going to be, any kind of business at the moment is really suffering with what's happening, and it's not going to be easy for anybody to survive. So in honest answer, I don't know. I just think they need to look at other ways to bring money into the club, to retain the players, and to try to push on and do the best they can in a really tricky, unprecedented situation. This weekend saw the start of the TriNations Cup or competition. The opening game was played at Sydney in front of 26,000 plus people, which was an amazing achievement. between Australia and New Zealand. New Zealand served up a bit of a Halloween nightmare though for the inexperienced Wallaby side, romping to a 43-5 victory. Interesting fact, it's the 18th consecutive year that they have won the Bledisloe Cup. Richie Mwanga scored 2 brilliant tries from the highlights that I saw in 6 first half minutes, and forwards Dane Coles and Tui Nukaf, sorry if I said that wrongly, also crossed the whitewash as they raced to a 26 lead in just half an hour. Wallabies hit back with a young fly half, Noah Loizo, scoring a try in a debut. But then Rico Ione, Geordie Barrett, blew the score out of the water in the last 10 minutes, really. So Mwanga, he converted 5 of the 6 tries and added a penalty. He is becoming quite a consistent goal kicker. His match tally was 23 points, which actually ensured it was the highest victory for the All Blacks in the 169 test against the Wallabies. Sam Cane, the All Blacks captain, said after the game that it was more of a relief. It was really exciting, and he was very proud of the group and excited about what was lying ahead for the All Blacks. So as we know, the Rugby Championship is no more. It's now back to the TriNations, which also involves Argentina. South Africa withdrew from the Southern Hemisphere tournament, citing player welfare concerns. So we're now down to 3 teams. To be fair, the Australians team, like I said, they were young and probably needed everything to go right for them to have a chance of beating the All Blacks. But they were back on the back foot within the first 3 minutes. Later on in the game, Duanga was yellow carded for upending a jumping Caleb Clark. Although I thought that was a little bit harsh because, he was kind of nudged into his opposition winger by Kane. Geordie Barrett was also yellow carded. He was sent to the sin bin for an elbow to Nick White's face. But the All Blacks obviously continued on and managed to seal the victory. Michael Hooper said after the game that he just didn't think that the Wallabies were accurate enough. They gave away too many balls too easily, and they didn't kick smart. I tend to agree with him on that one. I think it's really difficult for a young, inexperienced team to go up against the might of the All Blacks. Fingers crossed that they can improve as the tournament goes on. As I said at in the introduction to this episode, I just want to take some time to talk about JJ Williams, who sadly passed away this week. He died at the age of 72 from cancer. Now, Williams played in the 1970s, which was considered a golden era for the Welsh Rugby Union. So high was the profile of the players, they were actually known by their initials or first names. So, for example, JJ, JPR, Mervyn, Gareth, Gerald and Phil. But interestingly, Williams was quite an athlete as well, and could have forged a career on the track rather than choosing the shirt of Llanelli and then Wales. Interestingly, he was a Welsh secondary schoolboy international for both rugby union and athletics, and actually represented his country as a sprinter in the 1970 Commonwealth Games in Edinburgh. After that, though, he decided just to focus on his rugby, which was great news for the Welsh and then the Lions supporters. He went on to win 30 caps and score 12 tries for Wales, and appeared in 7 tests for the Lions in South Africa in 1974 and New Zealand 3 years later. As we know, that tour to South Africa was one of the most successful Lion tours of all times. And Bill McLaren, the famous commentator, actually referred to Williams as quick as a trout up a burn. I didn't do it in a Scottish accent, so I don't think I'd do it any justice. Interesting though, it wasn't just Williams's pace that was so key to his game. He was also amazing at the chip and chase. and would often dink little balls over the on-rushing defence and run the ball down to score tries. And that was actually, that skill kind of helped him to one of the 2 tries in the third test against the Springboks in Port Elizabeth in 1974. And if you remember, that was the match that was considered one of the most violent tests in sport history. The Lions had already won the first 2 tests, the first being in Cape Town and the second in Pretoria. But the All Blacks, the Springboks, were really, really worried about a humiliating whitewash defeat and a 3-0 win to the Lions. And there was a number of fights that broke out in those games. Nelson Mandela was in his 10th year of his internment at Robben Island. So he was someone that was also very happy with the fact that the Lions had beaten the Springboks. And then it was another 21 years before Mandela was next seen wearing the Springboks jersey when they beat the All Blacks in the Rugby World Cup. So yeah, that was a little bit of interesting information about JJ Williams. Really sad to hear that loss, and our thoughts are with his family. There was one game which was a rearranged game played in the Allianz Ladies 15s, which was played on Halloween, which was Bristol Bears against Wasps, and this was quite a one-sided affair, with Wasps scoring 10 tries and getting the bonus point win. There was a fiery first half, which saw 7 tries from Wasps, leading Bristol with lots of work to do in the second half. Which they did. They came back into the game and got themselves on the board, but unfortunately for Bristol, Wasps ran out 64-10 winners. Interesting game. I think it's Ellie Boatman, is it? She collected several tries, and yeah, unfortunately they were just too much for Bristol Bears. Next week, I think there is another rescheduled game. I could be wrong though, but we'll catch up next week on any fixtures in the ladies' game. As we know, the recent game between England and the Barbarians was cancelled due to 13 players breaking the agreement they had signed. They left the hotel in central London and went out for a meal, and it's looking like they're going to be facing a range of charges. Or also, they provided false statements during the investigation. I think the players are under a lot of scrutiny from the public, and I don't think, from what I've read, the full judgment and the names will be given out until it's all kind of done. But we do know, obviously, Rob Shaw, Wigglesworth, Kapoku, Jackson Ray, and a number of other players were involved in what happened. But like I said before, I do listen to other rugby podcasts, one of those being The Good, the Bad and the Rugby with Haskell, Payno and Tins. And Haskell this week came to defending the actions of the players. Whilst he recognised the fact that what they did was wrong, his argument was that nobody should be receiving death threats for what they did, but clearly they are. And he was also a bit critical of the organisation itself. So he was given the examples that the England players were allowed to go home and see their family. The players were allowed to go out to a cafe. So what's the difference between going to a cafe and a bar? I think ultimately, having listened to that, I did kind of waver a bit and think, bloody hell, yeah, it wasn't particularly well organised, and it must have been quite confusing for the players. And then I heard the other side of the coin, where the police officer that was killed in custody recently, that game was being played in his memory. The Barbarians had his local team's socks and were going to wear them in his honour, and then some of the proceedings would have gone to his family. But obviously that's not happened. The RFU will have lost out on millions of pounds of sponsorship and investment from people, and it's just a bit of a shit show all round, really. Old Eddie Jones piped up and kind of gave his view, and he kind of felt that he urged the critics not to be too harsh on Robshaw. Obviously it left his kind of plans in a bit of tatter with no warm-up game ahead of the Six Nations final against Italy. He offered the back into Robshaw and insisted that England will be still ready to play Italy on Saturday. I don't think this situation is going to kind of go away anytime soon. Will these players' kind of careers be marred by this? Potentially. It will give them something more to talk about after the speaking, though. It's just not a great situation all round, really, and very sad for rugby. So, as we know, the last year's Six Nations finished this weekend with the games between Scotland and Wales. That's the game I'm going to kind of start off with, because it was the order in which the television, the TV aired the games. I did actually get to watch the Wales Scotland game, and as we know, it was a win for Wales. Game was played at the Nethley, and it wasn't a particularly enthralling game, but it was an interesting one in the fact that Scotland came out on top. Gregor Townsend seems to have kind of moved away from his fast rugby philosophy, and it was much more of a kind of performance from Scotland that was a ground out, forward dominated performance from them. I thought the back row were particularly good today, and Jamie Ritchie and Hamish Watson, they were the kind of standout players in the team, and I think they've probably done themselves no harm in their performance, obviously with the Lions coming up soon. Shame that they lost Finn Russell. He obviously went off injured. He didn't really have a chance to kind of shine during the game. To be fair, nobody really had a chance to shine. The conditions weren't the best. It was very windy. The ball was swirling around. As for Wales, they just appeared to lack any real kind of plan, I guess. They kind of seemed to be living off the scraps of Scotland. It was... Wayne Pivac is obviously the new coach, and again, I saw on social media again that people were calling for him to be sacked and got rid of already. At the end of the day, you've got to give the guy a chance to instill in the players his kind of vision of how he wants the Welsh rugby to be played, and then obviously for them to take that on board and put it into actual game time. Interesting stats that kind of came out of the game was that what was that stat again? I think the penalty count was 16-6 in Scotland's favour. So Wales gave away 16 penalties in the game, which is a crazy amount of penalties, to be fair. I just think it will be interesting to see how both teams fare in this autumn's Eight Nations Cup. I think Scotland will go well, and I think Wales potentially will struggle. And obviously it was Alan Wynne-Jones's, Wales couldn't kind of cap it off for the big second row on his 150 appearance for Wales, I think. I'm sure they would have loved to have done that for him, and that's another kind of thing. There didn't seem to be, the Welsh boys knowing that was his big game. There wasn't that kind of fear or that kind of drive to kind of go out and kind of do it for him, as it were. And one other point, I thought the Scottish scrum was really good today, really good at the game, and they seem to be using that as a bit of a weapon. So they're moving on to the next game. We had obviously England against Italy, with England running out 34-5 winners at the Stadio Olimpico. Ben Young's obviously his 100th cap, picked up a couple of tries, which just added to the occasion for him. I thought the second try, the one that just came after the half time, was fantastic. England really didn't get going in the first half, and to be fair, they probably suffered from that Barbarians game that was cancelled. They looked like they needed a half to kind of get into the game. And obviously Jamie George also was getting his 50th cap as well. The first half was nothing special really, but the second half was a lot better. Something that was interesting from the Italians, they seemed to be giving it a bit of the old chat during the game, up in their faces, up in the England faces, and really kind of going at them and showing a kind of aggressive side that we've not really seen, I guess, from Italy, which is all very well and good, but at the same time they let in 5 tries in the end. 5 tries in the end. And that all that gusto and in your face kind of like aggression didn't really kind of work in their favour with a victory. And obviously with the England game, it then moved on to the final game, where Ireland were playing France. And my understanding was that for Ireland to be crowned the champions at the time, they needed to beat France by 8 points, I think it was. And then obviously I think France needed to get the bonus point try, but then also win by 35 points. So it was very much, England had a bit of a nervous wait to see how this kind of game panned out. And it was, it was delicately poised, shall we say. Oh no, my mistake. Ireland needed to win with a bonus point to be sure of claiming the title, or by 6 points to claim it on points difference. And France needed to win by 31 with a bonus point. For Ireland, unfortunately for them, it wasn't to be. They lost the game to France. France, by half time they were 17-14 up. It was a really, really interesting game. I thought France defended quite well. It was very much a frustrating night for Ireland. Roman Intermac, Vatakawa, scoring their couple of tries. Old Johnny Sexton, when he got substituted by Andy Farrell, did not look happy at all with being taken off the field. And I thought his reaction was a little bit over the top. I appreciate that he's passionate and wanting to win, but at the end of the day, it's a team game, and obviously Farrell's the coach and makes his decision. I think also, watching the game, Ireland spent quite a lot of time in the French 22, but they weren't kind of converting that territory into points, which I think ultimately kind of cost them the game. So England were crowned Six Nations champions. And if I'm right in thinking, there was an interesting stat. Since Eddie Jones has taken over as England manager, let me just kind of find it. Hang on. Bear with. So England have won the Six Nations 3 times in 5 years. 2016 they won, backed that up in 2017. 2018 was a bad year, they finished 5th. 2019 they finished 2nd, and obviously this year they've topped the table, and in those times there was one Grand Slam. So England are very much on a rich vein of form underneath Eddie Jones, obviously reaching the final of the World Cup. I'm expecting them to go well in the Eight Nations, which is coming up, and that's something that I will talk about in next week's podcast, and what the outcome will be from that. One interesting point, I think, what did Owen Farrell said? He said it feels like we have a brilliant blend of experience and youth to drive us forward. Being involved in training over the last few weeks has shown that for us, we are looking forward to what is in front of us as well. I agree. I think England, with a few more games, will do well in this eight Nations Championship. So it's the fact of the week time, and this week's fact is about the All Blacks and how the All Blacks have a winning record against everyone. Few teams in any sport have been as impressive as the All Blacks throughout history. Since their first game in 1903, the All Blacks have won 77% of their games. What's more impressive is that they have a winning record against all 22 teams they have played. The two sides that have troubled the All Blacks the most are fellow TriNations teams Australia and South Africa. The All Blacks own a 115-44-7 record against Australia and a 59-36-4 record against South Africa. That was the rugby fact of the week. So we also saw the end of the ladies Six Nations Championship, with England easing their way to a second consecutive Grand Slam triumph on Sunday when they comprehensively beat Italy 54-0. They notched up 8 tries. Poppy Cleal, Emily Scarrett and Abby Ward, and by half time they were 20-8 to 0 up, and then in the second half further scores came through Sarah Byrne, Jess Breach, Leanne Riley and Marley Packer. I have seen a few of the highlights. I think it's just, the gulf of class between England ladies, the Red Roses, and Italy was there for all to see. Obviously they'd already confirmed last weekend that they were the Six Nations champions. But like I said, beating Italy on Sunday gave them the Grand Slam. England, they just dominated the entire championship, to be fair. And it's their 15th Grand Slam with their 16th championship win. What it does also mean that the England men's and women's team have both secured the 2020 titles for the first time they've completed that double since 2017. And it's a fantastic achievement all round. Emily Scarrett for me is a fantastic player, such grace, such power, and obviously adding the kicking ability, and yeah, it was a fantastic result, and well done to the Red Roses. That's the end of this episode, and it just leaves me to say thank you once again to I Spy Surveys, the specialist survey and inspection company based in Exeter, for sponsoring this episode. If you are wanting to follow us, then it is at the Top 2 Inches RP on Twitter. Get involved, follow me on there. You'll get all the links and stuff, when they come out. If you do also want to follow the show or the episode, you can catch me on YouTube, Apple Podcast, Anchor and Spotify. So thank you again for listening. I look forward to next week when I shall be taking a look at the up and coming Eight Nations event. We will also be reviewing the ladies game, checking in again on the Bledisloe Cup, not the Bledisloe Cup, the TriNations, sorry. and any other interesting rugby things that have taken place over the last week. You've been listening to the Top 2 Inches Rugby Podcast.